6. The cell of the barn was curiously cool, dank, smelling of cobwebs and earth water. The sun lit it in dusty rays from narrow windows, but here was none of the day's heat. The boy kept the hawk here, and the bird seemed comfortable enough. David no longer hunted the sky. His feathers had lost the radiant animal brightness of 3 years ago, but the eyes were still as piercing and as motionless as ever. "You cannot friend a hawk," they said, "unless you are half a hawk yourself. Alone and only a sojourner in the land, without friends or the need of them, the hawk pays no coinage to love or morals." David was an old hawk now. The boy hoped that he himself was a young one. "Hi," he said softly, and extended his arm to the tethered perch. The hawk stepped onto the boy's arm and stood motionless, unhooded. With his other hand the boy reached into his pocket and fished out a bit of dried jerky. The hawk snapped it deftly from between his fingers and made it disappear. The boy began to stroke David very carefully. Court most probably would not have believed it if he had seen it, but Court did not believe the boy's time had come neither. "I think you die today," he said, continuing to stroke. "I think you will be made a sacrifice, like all those little birds who trained you. Do you remember? No? It doesn't matter. After today, I am the hawk, and each year on this day, I'll shoot the sky in your memory." David stood on his arm, silent and unblinking, indifferent to his life or death. "You are old," the boy said reflectively, "and perhaps not my friend. Even a year ago you would have had my eyes instead of that little string of meat, isn't it so?" Court would laugh. "But if we get close enough to that cherry man, if he doesn't suspect, which will it be, David? Age or friendship?" David did not say. The boy hooded him and found the jesses, which were looped at the end of David's perch. They left the barn. 7. The yard behind the great hall was not really a yard at all, but only a green corridor whose walls were formed by tangled, thick-growing hedges. It had been used for the rite of coming of age since the time out of mind, long before Court and his predecessor, Mark, who had died of a stab wound from an overzealous hand in this place. Many boys had left the corridor from the east end, where the teacher always entered as men. The east end faced the great hall and all the civilization and intrigue of the lighted world. Many more had slunk away, beaten and bloody, from the west end, where the boys always entered as boys forever. The west end faced the farms and the hut dwellers beyond the farms. Beyond that, the tangled barbarian forests. Beyond that, Garland, and beyond Garland, the Mohaine Desert. The boy who had become a man progressed from darkness and unlearning to light and responsibility. The boy who was beaten could only retreat forever and forever. The hallway was as smooth and green as a gaming field. It was exactly 50 yards long. In the middle was a swatch of shaven earth. This was the line. Each end was usually clogged with tense spectators and relatives, for the ritual was usually forecast with great accuracy. 18 was the common age. Those who had not made their test by the age of 25 usually slipped into obscurity as freeholders unable to face the brutal all-or-nothing fact of the field and the test. But on this day, there were none but Jamie de Curry, Cuthbert Allgood, Alan Jones, and Thomas Whitman. They clustered at the boy's end, grape-mouthed and frankly terrified. "Your weapon, stupid!" Cuthbert hissed in agony. "You forgot your weapon!" "I have it," the boy said. Dimly he wondered if the news of this lunacy had reached yet to the central buildings, to his mother and to Martin. His father was on a hunt, not due back for days. In this he felt a sense of shame, for he felt that in his father he would have found understanding, if not approval. "Has Court come?" "Court is here." The voice came from the far end of the corridor, and Court stepped into view, dressed in a short singlet. A heavy leather band encircled his forehead to keep sweat from his eyes. He wore a dirty girdle to hold his back straight. He held an ironwood stick in one hand, sharp on one end, heavily blunted and spatulated on the other. He began the litany which of all of them, chosen by the blind blood of their fathers all the way back to the eld, had known since early childhood, learned against the day when they would, perhaps, become men. "Have you come here for a serious purpose, boy?" "I have come for a serious purpose." "Have you come as an outcast from your father's house?" "I have so come, and would remain an outcast until he had bested Court. If Court bested him, he would remain an outcast forever." "Have you chosen your weapon?" "I have." "What is your weapon?" This was the teacher's advantage, his chance to adjust his plan of battle to sling or spear or bow. "My weapon is David." Court halted only briefly. He was surprised and very likely confused. That was good. Might be good. "So then, have you at me, boy?" "I do." "In whose name?" "In the name of my father." "Say his name." "Stephen Deschain, of the line of Eld." "Be swift then." And Court advanced into the corridor, switching his stick from one hand to the other. The boys sighed flutteringly, like birds, as their Da-Din stepped to meet him. "My weapon is David, teacher." Did Court understand? And if so, did he understand fully? If he did, very likely all was lost. It turned on surprise, and on whether stuff like the hawk had left him. Would he only sit, disinterred and stupid, on the boy's arm, while Court struck him brainless with the ironwood, or seek escape in the high, hot sky? As they drew closer together, each of the nuns still on his side of the line, the boy loosened the hawk's hood with nerveless fingers. It dropped to the green grass, and Court halted in his tracks. He saw the old warrior's eyes drop to the bird, and widen with surprise and slow-drawing comprehension. Now he understood. "Oh, you little fool," Court said, nearly groaned, and Roland was suddenly furious that he should be spoken to so. "At him!" he cried, raising his arm, and David flew like a silent brown bullet, stubby wings pumping once, twice, 3 times before crashing into Court's face, talons searching, beaking, digging. Red drops flew up into the hot air. "Hail, Roland!" Cuthbert screamed deliriously. First blood to my bosom!" He struck his chest hard enough to leave a bruise there that would not fade for a week. Court staggered backwards off balance. The ironwood staff rose and beat futilely at the air about his head. The hawk was an undulating, blurred bundle of feathers. The boy, meanwhile, arrowed forward, his hand held out in a straight wedge, his elbow locked. This was his chance, and very likely the only one he'd have. Still, Court was almost too quick for him. The bird had covered almost 90% of his vision, but the ironwood came up again, spatulated end forward, and Court cold-bloodedly performed the only action that could turn events at this point. He beat his own face 3 times, bicep flexing mercilessly. David fell away, broken and twisted. One wing flapped frantically at the ground. His cold predator's eyes stared fiercely into the teacher's bloody, screaming face. Court's bad eye now bulged blindly from its socket. The boy delivered a kick to Court's temple, connecting solidly. It should have ended it, but it did not. For a moment Court's face went slack, and then he lunged, grabbing for the boy's foot. The boy skipped back and tripped over his own feet. He went down a sprawl. He heard from far away the sound of Jamie screaming in dismay. Court was ready to fall on him and finish it. Roland had lost his advantage, and both of them knew it. For a moment they looked at each other, the teacher standing over the pupil, with gouts of blood pouring from the left side of his face, the bad eye now closed, except for a thin slit of white. There would be no brothels for Court this night. Something ripped jaggedly at the boy's hand. It was David, tearing blindly at whatever he could reach. Both wings were broken. It was incredible that he still lived. The boy grabbed him like a stone, unmindful of the jabbing, diving beak that was taking the flesh from his wrist and ribbons. As Court flew at him, all spread-eagled, the boy threw the hawk upward. "Hi, David! Kill!" Then Court blotted out the sun and came down atop of him. 8. The bird was smashed between them, and the boy felt a calloused thumb thrown for the socket of his eye. He turned it, at the same time bringing up the slab of his thigh to block Quart's crotch-seeking knee. His own hand failed against the tree of Quart's neck in 3 hard chops. It was like hitting ribbed stone. Then Quart made a thick grunting. His body shuddered. Faintly the boy saw one hand flailing for the dropped stick, and with a jackknife lunge he kicked it out of reach. David had hooked one talon into Quart's right ear. The other battered mercilessly at the teacher's cheek, making it a ruin. Warm blood spattered the boy's face, smelling of sheared copper. Quart's fist struck the bird once, breaking its back. Again, and the neck snapped away at a crooked angle. And still the talon clutched. There was no ear now, only a red hole tunneled into the side of Quart's skull. The third blow sent the bird flying, at last clearing Quart's face. The moment it was clear, the boy brought the edge of his hand across the bridge of the teacher's nose, using every bit of his strength and breaking the thin bone. Blood sprayed. Quart's grasping, unseeing hand ripped at the boy's buttocks, trying to pull his trousers down, trying to hobble him. Roland rolled away, found Quart's stick, and rose to his knees. Came Quart to his own knees, grinning. Incredibly, they faced each other, that way from side of the line, although they had switched positions, and Quart was now on the side where Roland had begun the contest. The old warrior's face was curtained with gore. The one-seeing eye rolled furiously in its socket. The nose was smashed over to a haunted leaning angle. Both cheeks hung in flaps. The boy held a man's stick like a grand points player waiting for the pitch of the rawhide bird. Quart double feinted, then come directly at him. Roland was ready, not fooled in the slightest by this last trick, which both knew was a poor one. The iron wood swung in a flat arc, striking Quart's skull with a dull thudding noise. Quart fell on one side, looking at the boy with lazy, unseeing expression. A thin trickle of spit came from his mouth. "Yield or die," the boy said, his mouth filled with wet cotton. And Quart smiled. Nearly all consciousness was gone, and he would remain tend in his cottage for a week afterwards, wrapped in the blackness of a coma, but now he held on with all the strength of his pitiless, shadowless life. He saw the need to palaver in the boy's eyes, and even with a curtain of blood between the two of them, understood the need was desperate. "I yield, Gunslinger. I yield smiling. You have this day remembered the face of your father, and all those who came before him. What a wonder you have done." Quart's clear eye closed. The gunslinger shook him gently, but with persistence. The other were around him now, their hands trembling to thump his back and hoist him to their shoulders, but they held back, afraid, seeing a new gulf. Yet this was not as strange as it could have been, because there had always been a gulf between this one and the rest. Quart's eye rolled open again. "The key," the gunslinger said. "My birthright, teacher. I need it." His birthright was the guns. Not the heavy ones of his father, weighted with sandalwood, but guns all the same. Forbidden to all but a few. In the heavy vault under the barracks, where he, by ancient law, was no required to abide, away from his mother's breast, hung his apprentice weapons. Heavy, cumbersome barrel shooters of steel and nickel. Yet they had seen his father through his apprenticeship, and his father now ruled, at least in the name. "Is your need so fearsome, then?" Quart muttered, as if in his sleep. "So pressing. Aye, I feared so. So much need should have made you stupid. And yet you won. The key. The hawk was a fine ploy, a fine weapon. How long did it take you to train the bastard?" "I never trained David. I friended him. The key. Under my belt, Gunslinger." The eye closed again. The gunslinger reached under Quart's belt, feeling the heavy press of the man's belly, the huge muscles there, now slack and asleep. The key was on a brass ring. He clutched it in his hand, restraining the mad urge to thrust it up to the sky in a salutation of victory. He got to his feet and was finally turning to the others when Quart's hand fumbled for his foot. For a moment the gunslinger feared some last attack and tensed, but Court only looked up at him and beckoned with one crusted finger. "I'm going to sleep now," Court whispered calmly. "I am going to walk the path, perhaps all the way to the clearing at the end. I don't know. I teach you no more, Gunslinger. You have surpassed me, and 2 years younger than your father, who was the youngest. But let me counsel." "What?" impatiently. "Wipe that look off your face, maggot." In his surprise, he did as he was bid, although crouched hidden behind his face, as we all are, could not know it. Cord nodded, then whispered a single word. "Wait." "What?" The effort it took the man to speak lent his words great emphasis. "Let the word and the legend go before you. There are those who will carry both." His eyes flickered over the gunslinger's shoulder. "Fools, perchance. Let your shadow grow hair on its face. Let it become dark." He smiled grotesquely. "Given time, words may even enchant an enchanter. Do you take my meaning, Gunslinger?" "Yes, I think I do." "Will you take my last counsel as your teacher?" The gunslinger rocked back on his heels, a hungered, thinking posture that foreshadowed the man. He looked at the sky. It was deepening, purpling. The heart of the day was falling, and thunderheads in the west foretold rain. Lightning thin jabbed the placid flank of the rising foothills, miles distant. Beyond that, the mountains. Beyond that, the rising fountains of blood and unreason. He was tired into his bones, and beyond it. He looked back at Court. "I will bury my hawk tonight, teacher, and later go into the lower town to inform those in the brothels that will wonder about you. Perhaps I will confront one or two a little." Court's lips parted in a pained smile, and then he slept. The gunslinger got to his feet and turned to the others. "Make a litter and take him to his house. Then bring a nurse. No, 2 nurses, okay?" They still watched him, caught in a baited moment that none of them could immediately break. They still looked for a corona of fire, or a magical change of features. 2 nurses, the gunslinger repeated, and then smiled. They smiled in return, nervously. "You goddamn horse rover!" Cuthbert suddenly yelled, grinning. "You haven't left enough meat for the rest of us to pick off the bone!" "The world won't move on tomorrow," the gunslinger said, quoting the old adage with a smile. "Elaine, you butterbutt, move your freight." Elaine set about the business of making the litter. Thomas and Jamie went together to the main hall and the infirmary. The gunslinger and Cuthbert looked at each other. They had always been the closest, or as close as they could be under the particular shades of their character. There was a speculative, open light in Bert's eyes, and the gunslinger controlled only with great difficulty the need to tell him not to call for the test for a year or even 18 months, lest he go west. But they had been thought a great ordeal together, and the gunslinger did not feel he could risk saying such a thing without a look on his face that might be taken for arrogance. "I've begun to scheme," he thought, and was a little dismayed. Then he thought of Martin, of his mother. He smiled a deceiver's smile at his friend. "I am to be the first," he thought, knowing it for the first time, although he had thought of it idly many times before. "I am the first. Let's go." "With pleasure, Gunslinger." They left by the east end of the hedge-bordered corridor. Thomas and Jamie were returning with the nurses already. They looked like ghosts in their white and gauzy summer robes, crossed at the breast with red. "Shall I help you with the hawk?" Cuthbert asked. "Yes," the gunslinger said. "That would be lovely, Bert." And later, when darkness had come and the rushing shadows with it, while huge phantom caissons rolled across the sky and lightning washed the crooked streets of the lower town in a blue fire, while horses stood at hitching rails with their heads down and their tails dropping, the gunslinger took a woman and lay with her. It was quick and good. When it was over, and they lay side by side without speaking, It began to hail with a brief rattling ferocity. Downstairs and far away, someone was playing Hey Jude, Ragtime. The gunslinger's mind turned reflectively inward. It was in that hail-splattered silence just before sleep overtook him that he first thought he might also be the last. Thank you guys for staying with us for Roland's Rite of Passage, and tomorrow we'll continue with the gunslinger and the boy inside the mountain. Thank you for listening. Long days and pleasant nights to you.